see you there. I was staying engrossed in reading this book entitled Things Fall Apart. You know what? I've been wondering who helped shape literature as it is today. The writer of the book that I'm reading, Chinua Achebe, is from Africa, and I'm really curious about how significant his works are in African literature. It's interesting to know more about what happened in the past and how it influenced the new wave of writers this 21st century. So let's find out, shall we?
Oh, hi there. I see you're reading one of the literature from Africa. That's a great piece of literature. But did you know that our own country has its own distinct style of writing too? There are lots of phenomenal writers who are remarkable at their time. Shall we talk about it? It would be good if we are on the same page here.
Hello there! Join our conversation as we tackle new knowledge and dig deeper onto creative and amazing literature of Africa and Philippines and their importance to their communities.
Let us also tell the similarities and differences of each literature. It's interesting to know how it was developed through time. Are you ready?
Huh, I was born ready.
The history of Philippine literature is amazing. It has influenced by 4 different periods, making rich as it is. The pre-colonial period, which is the earliest form of literature that includes myths, folk tales, legends, and fables that is passed down by mouth. And baybayin was the writing system at this period. The next period is the Spanish period, which Spaniards burned down ancient manuscript believing it was work of evil, thus changing the writing system from baybayin to Roman alphabet. In this era, the commedia, the cenaculo, the zarzuela, the playlets, and the dramas were introduced.
African literature has different periods, which are the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial period, and includes both written and oral literature. And according to Britannica, the oral tradition of storytelling from pre-colonial period is still prominent, even in 21st century works. During the colonial period, African writers were only starting to become literate, and they wrote narratives to show that they were slaves in their own land. In the 19th century, African writers used newspapers to amplify their voices about condemning colonialism. In the post-colonial period, there was a surge of African writers that produced works with themes about the horrors of being an African due to racism. Through writings, African demanded for independence and talk about social and political events. That sums up the history of African literature.
Thank you for sharing. For now, let's go back to the admirable literature in the Philippines, and I would like to share more extensively. I believe it was divided into 3 eras: the pre-colonial period, the colonial legacies, and the contemporary period. In the pre-colonial period, most forms of literature were in folk speech, folk songs, folk narratives, and indigenous rituals and mimetic dances. After the Spaniards have arrived, in which the start of the colonial period, this is when the Catholic religion was introduced. Literature in this period focused more on religious and secular prose and poetry. As the American period starts, in which we call the period of imitation, the writers in English imitated the methods and themes of the Americans. In the Japanese period, the war affected the literature because many valuable documents and writings were burned to ashes. Writers feel suppressed, but the common theme for most poems were journalistic in nature and nationalism. The blooming of the Philippine literature, or the contemporary period, was when the writers felt their freedom as they continued to write novellas, short stories, poetries, and essays with various just like gender, social status, and even for personal perspective. How about you then?
Since there are a lot of countries in Africa that were colonized by European countries, their literary works are written in both African and European languages. African literature has a wide variety of both oral and written literature from various African ethnic groups. Some forms of oral literature in pre-colonial period were myths, folk tales, dramas, and songs, and the contents of these works were often about the creation of the world and legends. During the colonial period, written narratives flamed their desire to gain independence. The most common theme of literary works in the post-colonial period was racial segregation and apartheid. Lastly, the contemporary period continues to descend and expose the corruption and other issues in the modern African government. Now, how about we flex our remarkable writers? Let's start at famous writers on the Philippines on their own period.
A basic knowledge for Filipinos, as their national hero is one of the formidable writers in the Spanish era, Jose Rizal with his political novels, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, together with Marcelo H. Del Pilar with his Dasalan and Toksohan.
Chinua Achebe, known as the father of African literature, is one of the most notable writers in African history because he used his writings to portray the racism and discrimination of Africans back then.
Jose Garcia Villa, an American period artist, is one of the national artists, and his astounding works makes him an important figure up until to modern poetry with his works Art's Forsake and Footnote to You.
Sol Plaatje is a significant writer for African literature because he was a political activist that fought for the rights and freedom of Native Africans. One of his known works is entitled Native Life in South Africa.
One more capable artist in the American period was Angela Manalang Gloria. Her work, Revolt from Hymen, is a poem protesting against marital rape. She is described as the matriarch of Filipina poet as her poems were highly appreciated by many.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is a new generation African writer. Her works are usually interwoven with the background of her Nigerian ethnicity, and she also involves social and political events in her work.
One last favorable artist on Japanese period was Carlos P. Romulo, who won the Pulitzer Prize, and some of his notable works were I Saw the Fall of the Philippines and I See the Philippines Rise. For now, let us talk about the significance of literature to its community. You go first.
African literature is very important for Africa as a nation because through writings, they stood up for themselves and got independence and rights they deserve. Karu Voices, a section in an organization named The Journalist, stated that African literature helps develop our knowledge in social issues because most of the thems were happening in reality. African literature also raises awareness on political and economic crises that are happening in Africa. Through reading the works of African writers, their culture, traditions, and tragedies can be acknowledged.
Philippine literature is an epiphany of struggles, violence, and injustice our ancestors experienced from the colonizers. It mirrors the different societies before, during, and after colonialism because of how versatile the style and themes of our literature are. Through the literature written by our remarkable authors, we can delve deeper into what we've experienced as Filipinos and to share the story to the people who read and study our literature. It is a powerful medium to gain a better understanding of our colorful history, tradition, and culture. The lessons and morals from literature is a source of inspiration for us to behave in a way the society can benefit.
How about their similarities and differences in terms of themes and approach?
Well, the similarities are evident in its themes as both countries suffered from colonialism and oppression from tyranny. The theme of horrors of slavery and colonial repression was evident on their writing and approach, and it also talks about nationalism.
Both literature was similar in a sense that both countries suffered from abuse and racism, making their writings voice out the words of the unheard, just like Rizal used his writings to reveal the dirty works of the Spaniards. Africans also used newspaper to deliver the news of too much slavery.
But as literature blooms and develops, the Philippine literature is now at the peak of its improvement. The writers are free to express their emotions and thoughts through writing, thus requiring the teaching of Philippine literature in all tertiary schools in the country.
As for African literature, it is slowly gaining more recognition worldwide because of the accolades that African writers are getting. Because education is accessible to more Africans, there are also many improvements happening in present African literature.
Wow! That was a really interesting comparison between two great literatures. I've learned so much about African literature. How about you?
I had a good time. That was another page of knowledge added to me. How about you? We hope you learned a lot and filled your curiosity with our vlog. Until next time,
bye!
bye.